Tell someone you prefer winter. Watch their face. There is a specific expression people make. Not quite judgment, not quite concern, something closer to the look you get when you tell a doctor a symptom they were not expecting. As if preferring cold air and gray skies is a sign that something went wrong somewhere in your development, and they are quietly trying to figure out where. You have probably never been able to fully explain it. You just feel it. The temperature drops. The sky goes that flat, heavy gray. The city gets quieter, and something in you, something that has been running slightly too fast for the past 6 months, exhales. This video is that explanation, the one you have been trying to find the words for every time someone asks how you can possibly prefer this. Let me tell you about a woman named Lena. Lena spent every summer of her adult life doing something that looked from the outside like a very specific kind of thriving. Rooftop dinners, weekend trips, plans appearing on her calendar with the regularity of tidal movements. She smiled through most of it. But she told me once, quietly, almost as a confession, that every year around the first week of October, when the temperature finally dropped and the invitations thinned out and her evenings stopped being something other people scheduled for her, she felt something she could only describe as a returning to herself. She had spent years assuming this meant something was wrong with her. It does not. And the psychology behind why it happens is more specific, more documented, and more interesting than anyone has ever taken the time to explain to her. Here's the first thing most people do not know. Most people have heard of seasonal affective disorder, the condition where reduced winter light triggers depression in certain people. What almost nobody knows is that Norman Rosenthal, the psychiatrist who formally described seasonal affective disorder in 1984, had already identified a summer variant by 1989, reverse SAD, a recognized pattern where heat and extended daylight trigger real depressive and anxiety symptoms in a specific subset of people. Less studied, less discussed, but documented. And for the people who experience it, every summer is not a season to enjoy, it's a season to survive. Plain English, the cultural story that summer is good and winter is hard is only true for certain nervous systems. For others, it's precisely backwards. Here's what's actually happening neurologically. Your nervous system has a processing threshold, a point at which the amount of sensory input coming in, light, heat, noise, movement, social demand, tips from stimulating into straining. Summer maximizes that input on every channel simultaneously. Bright, unfiltered light. Heat that is a physiological stressor, not just a temperature. Extended daylight that stretches the day into something that feels like a moral argument for doing more. For nervous systems calibrated towards lower optimal arousal, the technical term for brains that reach their processing limit faster, summer is not energizing, it's expensive. A 2015 study by psychologist Shigehiro Oishi found that introverts consistently preferred secluded, enclosed environments and reported measurably higher well-being in them. Winter does exactly this to a landscape. It closes things down, creates enclosure, narrows the visible world, drops the noise. The whole sensory load of being alive in public just recedes. For a nervous system running at capacity all summer, that recession is not deprivation, it's calibration. But here's where it gets more specific and more interesting, because the introvert framing is a little too tidy for what's actually happening in a significant number of people who prefer winter. There's a subset of winter people who are not particularly introverted at all. What they share instead is a very specific relationship with something that rarely gets named directly: permission. Modern life runs on performance, productivity, visibility, momentum. And summer amplifies all of it. The long days feel like a standing accusation. Every hour of daylight borrowed from a resource you're expected to spend, visibly, productively, socially. Even leisure has to look effortful. A sunny Saturday spent doing nothing carries a low-level guilt that a gray Tuesday does not. Think of it this way. Summer is a landlord who charges rent on your time. Winter cancels the lease. The darkness comes early. The cold gives you a reason to be inside. The world quietly agrees that slowing down is acceptable. And for people who are chronically hard on themselves, who struggle to rest without a reason, winter is the only season that hands them one, for free, without negotiation, without the guilt that follows them through June and July. This is what Lena was feeling every first week of October. Not sadness masquerading as relief, not avoidance of something she should have been facing. The specific physical release of a nervous system that had been operating over threshold for 6 months, finally being handed the conditions it actually needed. She was not returning to herself. She was returning to her baseline, the version of her that existed before the season required her to be a different, more visible, more socially available addition. Summer comes with a costume. There's a whole performance expected. The active version of you, the social version, the one with plans and enthusiasm for things that happen outdoors in direct sunlight at a reasonable hour. A lot of people wear that costume comfortably. Some find it exhausting in ways they can't put language to. Winter gives you your actual face back. The version that exists at home, in your own rhythm, without an audience. And for people whose inner life is richer than their outer presentation, which is more people than you'd think, that return is not a retreat from life. It's the place where most of their actual living happens. Here's the part that costs something. Because winter people carry a specific overhead that rarely gets acknowledged. They spend the majority of the year in a season calibrated for someone else's nervous system, someone else's social appetite, someone else's definition of what a good life looks like in July. And they navigate that gap quietly, rarely naming it, usually just getting through it and waiting for October the way other people wait for June. That's not weakness. That's what it costs to live in a world that built its entire concept of well-being around one kind of experience and forgot to account for the other. There's also something worth saying about how winter people see, and not in a vague way. People who love winter tend to describe it in terms that sound almost meditative. The quiet after heavy snowfall, the way sound gets absorbed, the specific color of light at 4 in the afternoon in December, that particular blue-gray that sits just before dark, which is genuinely extraordinary if you've ever stopped long enough to notice it. Attunement to that kind of detail, the quieter, slower, more overlooked kind, tends to track with a specific cognitive style. Depth over breadth, absorption over scanning, the kind of person who reads the last chapter of a book twice, or notices a change in someone's tone before they finish the sentence. Winter rewards that style of attention, in a way that summer, with its constant foreground noise and forward momentum, simply does not. So here's the question Lena eventually stopped being afraid to answer. Why did she spend years assuming the thing that restored her was a problem to be corrected? Because the culture said so, loudly, consistently, with the specific confidence of a majority that has never had to question whether the world was built for them. If summer is the default setting, the season the world agreed to celebrate, then preferring winter will always feel an error until you understand it as a preference, not a flaw, not avoidance, not something that happened in your development that someone could have caught earlier. A preference. One backed by real neuroscience, real psychology, real documented variation in how human nervous systems interact with the world. You are not the person who missed the point of summer. You're the person whose brain is running a different but equally valid program, one that has been spending years being treated as a malfunction by people who have never had to live inside it. Lena stopped apologizing for October around age 31. Not dramatically, not with a declaration. She just stopped explaining herself to people who had already decided what the right answer was. And she started describing what winter actually felt like, not as a preference for gray over blue,